Dr. Carsten Smith-Hall is professor and head of studies for the MSc program in environment development in the Department of Food and Resource Economics at the University of Copenhagen. His research is focused on three things. One, environment and livelihood relationships, including the role of forests in preventing and reducing poverty. Two, environment and human health, in particular, the role of forests in maintaining and improving welfare. And three, commercial utilization of biodiversity with an emphasis on trade and conservation issues. Carsten also is increasingly involved in research on the bioeconomy and climate change. He's directed international and interdisciplinary research programs and published extensively in natural and social science journals. He's a member of several international journal boards. He co-coordinates the IUFRO task force that's hosting this webinar, and he serves on the World Conservation Union's Medicinal Plant Specialist Group. Dr. Smith-Hall has significant capacity building experience through a range of large-scale projects, including the global PhD programs, Forest and Nature for Society, and the European MSc program in Sustainable Tropical Forestry. He's a strong advocate of internationalization of university teaching and a pioneer in developing and applying technologies in teaching. And with that note, I'm going to turn this over to Carsten. It's all yours,
great.
Carsten.
Thanks a lot, Jim. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you also for the invitation to present here at the seminar. I'm really excited to be here, looking forward to making my presentation and to also have discussions with you all afterwards. So good evening here from Kathmandu, where I am now in the Middle Hills, close to the Himalayas, or good morning. I think we are quite scattered across a number of time zones. Let me just share my screen here. All right. So I hope you can see this now. So the title here today is Towards a Himalayan Forest-Based Bioeconomy. The title was first just the Himalayan bioeconomy. I've chosen to narrow this down to the forest-based bioeconomy because it's easier to talk about the forest-based bioeconomy because it's more well-defined than the fluffy concept of the bioeconomy. So I'll just start the presentation here by talking about what is the forest-based bioeconomy, and then I'll proceed to talk about the characteristics of a Himalayan forest-based bioeconomy, and then go into more detail using the example of commercial medicinal plants. And that's what you can see in the slides here. On the photos, the top photo there are two collectors that are out in an alpine meadow collecting rhizomes and tubers. This is close to the timberline at around 4,000 meters in this place. And then they air dry these and they travel south and end up in trucks like that, and they go down to India. We'll talk more about that, right? So, but I'm going to use that example to illustrate the various aspects of the bioeconomy, and then I'll end by talking about what steps we can take towards a formal forest-based bioeconomy. What are these transition pathways? Because transition pathways are not something vague and mysterious. These are very concrete actions and activities, and we can identify them. So first, a few words about the bioeconomy. There are many terms out there, and I suppose many of you are familiar with this figure in one form or the other. What you can basically see here are four different types of ways of thinking about the economy. The big yellow one is the market economy, and then you have the B, the bioeconomy, the G, the green economy, and C, the circular economy. And what I want to show here is that is the width of the bioeconomy. So in that sense, it's quite a fluffy concept. Sometimes people talking about a circular economy may be talking about the exact same thing as someone talking about the bioeconomy, but they might also be talking about completely different things, depending on how they approach the concept of the bioeconomy. So we have been thinking about that. This is from a recent paper by Piplani and myself, and we've been trying to operationalize these concepts so they become more accessible to us. And as part of that work, we have tried to narrow down the term of the bioeconomy, focusing here on the forest-based bioeconomy. I think in many ways the bioeconomy is being a boundary object, very much perhaps like sustainability. So everyone thinks about, approaches sustainability as a positive concept and adapt it in various ways, but which is a good thing in the sense that sustainability is integrated across all sectors. But it's also, from an operational point of view, problematic because it can mean many different things to many different people. So what we're trying here is to move away from a fluffy boundary object to something which is more operational. And in this recent paper, we defined the forest-based bioeconomy as the set of economic activities to grow, harvest, process, reuse, recycle, and sell forest products and associated services. Of course, this is to some of you perhaps quite close to being a value chain definition, and it has definitely elements of that, but it's also much broader and includes, for instance, the development of forest management systems that you do not normally associate with the value chain. The really great thing about this definition and having this focus on the forest-based bioeconomy is that we can start to operationalize it. So in this paper, we reviewed the contents of 49 different papers and tried to distill what is the characteristics of the forest-based bioeconomy being described in these papers. And what you can see here in the left-hand column here, the questions are 7 key questions that distinguish the different types of ways of thinking about and approaching the forest-based bioeconomy. And by answering these 7 questions, we arrived at these 5 different forest-based bioeconomy schools. Some of you will be familiar with the paper by Bug et al. From 2016, where they talk about 3 visions of the bioeconomy. And you find these 3 visions here also. That's the biotechnology, the bioresource, and the bioecology visions. But here we take a step further and operationalize them by describing them through these 7 key questions. So these answers to the 7 questions are taken from these 49 papers. And by answering these questions, synthesizing them, we end up with these 5 schools. And they're quite different. To many people, the column called biotechnology is what constitutes the bioeconomy. So there's a focus on economic growth, on resource efficiency, on developing new high-value products that you can patent. And indeed, many of the bioeconomy papers that we read, they assume that that is bioeconomy. But different people think about that in different ways. And if you look here, for instance, at the social bioresource school, then the focus is not on economic growth and resource efficiency. The focus is on poverty alleviation, employment, resource sustainability. And the focus is not on developing new high-value product, but rather on boosting primary sector productivity and secondary processing. So the key point here is that there are many different ways of thinking about the bioeconomy. And this means that the concept of the bioeconomy is also useful way beyond thinking narrowly about biotechnology in, say, Finland, Sweden, and Germany. It is applicable to approach the forest sector in countries throughout the world. So let's just return to the focus here of on the Himalayan bioeconomy. What's the status for the Himalayan bioeconomy? Well, of course, in India and China, these huge countries, they have established some nominal specific bioeconomic strategies, but these are very much in line with the biotech vision and school, following that line of thinking. It's not focused on the use of non-timber forest products or decentralized natural resources management and so on. In other countries, in the Himalayan range, such as Nepal and Bhutan, there are no nominal bioeconomic strategies. So in that sense, you can say that there's really no explicit attention to a Himalayan bioeconomy at the moment, but there are many elements of a bioeconomy found in different legislation, policies, programs, implementations, and so on. But because there's no specific attention to the bioeconomy, it also means that there are unrealized potentials to support the development of industries, improve livelihoods, and promote conservation. So in a way, when we think about the forest-based bioeconomy as the 5 schools allow us, then that also shows that the bioeconomy represents an opportunity for us to rethink the forest sector, indeed to even reposition the forest sector. The forest sector in many Himalayan countries is challenged in many different ways, and the transition to a bioeconomy, or at least starting to think about the bioeconomy and how to translate to it, is an opportunity to increase the sustainable use of forest resources, to increase sustainable incomes from using them, to develop sustainable industries and sustainable consumption. But of course, this requires an explicit attention to the issues and dedicated efforts. And that's what I want to focus on now in the rest of the presentation here. So what characterizes the Himalayan forest-based bioeconomy? This is a quick look at this. So in the left column there under questions, you have these 7 questions. And then in the second column, the social bioresource school, you have the characteristics of that. And then you have the analysis of the commercial medicinal plant sector in the right-hand column there. And there is a very close fit between the commercial medicinal plant sector in Nepal and the characteristics of the social bioresource school. So for instance, the official goals in Nepal when it comes to commercial medicinal plants is to use these for poverty alleviation while also promoting sustainability. And there's a lot being traded here when we talk about non-timber forest products. If we look at medicinal plants alone, it's around 300 different species that are being traded. So in a way, different aspects of the bioeconomy is being addressed, but in connection, but not in an explicit way and not in a structured fashion. I just want to introduce you a bit more to the medicinal plant trade in and from Nepal. So this is just a map showing where we are. When we talk about these commercial medicinal plants that are being traded, then they all basically follow this same flow here, the same trade pattern. So starting on the left, then out in the villages, you have a lot of households, hundreds of thousands of households that go to the forest and other vegetation types to collect non-timber forest products that they then sell to traders located in towns and districts that then sell to central wholesalers in the cities of Nepal. And these central wholesalers, they export to cities in India and more also to cities in China. So the big export market, the dominant one, is India. China is also really important, and then there are also exports to other third countries, but the really big markets are in India and China. So that's the general flow of these plants, and that's true for all of them. There's also a domestic processing sector in Nepal, but it's not very big. So most is exported, air-dried, unprocessed. Just to give you a couple of examples of this, some of you will have heard about this, Ophiocalyptus sinensis. So this is also known as the caterpillar fungus. So essentially, this complex product is made up of a larva of a ghost moth that's infected by the spores from the fungus. And eventually this larva dies. And in May, when up in the alpine meadows, because this is a high altitude product from 3,500 up to maybe 5,000 meters, when the snow melts, you can see the fruiting body of the fungus coming up in the grass. And that's what you see in the left hand photo there next to the match. You can see the fruiting body coming up. And this is a fantastic product. In the lower right-hand photo there, you can see on the left the whole pieces. They're known as leg pieces. That's what the traders want. In the middle, you have broken pieces. They are also sold. And then you have what is known as fused pieces, the black ones on the right that you can't sell. The great thing about this product is that it is so valuable. It is sold at the price of $12,000 per kg to the harvesters. So this is not final consumer prices. This is not prices for, far away. No, it's the prices that the harvesters in remote areas, in harvesting sites in Nepal are being paid, $12,000 per kg. And of course, this is a fantastic break. Many of these communities have been paying taxes, of course, for a long time, but they don't really receive much services in terms of roads or electricity or piped water and so on. But finally, here they have this resource available to them. If we go back 20 years when I did field work in the high Himalayas, then you could get a handful of these Yasagumba here, as they're called, for a packet of cigarettes. But now the price has just soared and soared and soared. And this is mainly due to the rising incomes in China, because this is being virtually all of it being exported to China, where it's being used in various connections, including cancer treatment. But apparently the big demand is as an aphrodisiac, and maybe that explains why the price is so high. Another example here is this beautiful plant, Mansi, which is a perennial. It's also found that are from 3,000 meters to 4,000 meters. What makes it interesting from the point of view of bioeconomy is that what you cannot see here is below ground, the rhizome that it has contains essential oil. So here you see harvesters that have been harvesting this plant, literally this mountain of rhizomes. We're working on trying to quantify this trade at the moment, and we are estimating that around 1 billion rhizomes are being harvested in Nepal every year. And this is interesting from a number of different points. I mean, of course, there's the income to these harvesters, but there's also the sustainability concerns. So this is on CITES Appendix 2, meaning that it can only be exported if the harvest is sustainable. It's also being listed on the IUCN red list as vulnerable. So there's an important discussion going on about how sustainable is this harvest and trade, and we're trying to look into that at the moment. And it's something that is important to clarify, because if it's not sustainable, then there's a risk that export cannot continue. But eventually these plants here, they are harvested, they're air dried, and then they are put in bags, traditionally in gunny bags, and then they are transported down to the roadheads, and then eventually to processors, and then to consumers. This is a photo from a pharmacy where you can see all these beautiful products, and you can pick up, in case of the rhizomes we just saw here, for instance, a hair tonic or whatever it is that you need. So this was the flow of the trade. Question is how, from the bioeconomic point of view, of course, we want to be concerned with products that are of some significance. So just how important is this commercial medicinal plant trade? We collected a lot of data on this at the national level. And here are some of the preliminary results from that. You see the top product there called Yasagumba. Those are the caterpillars that I show you. And that is clearly by far the dominant product. It's only around 8 tons that is being harvested annually, but it's 88% of the total value to harvesters throughout the country. And this is a lot of money for these high altitude communities. So if you go there, you can see that a lot of new houses are being built. And if you ask people where did they get the money from to harvest, to build these new houses, and they will say, this is the Yasagumba money from the harvest that we did. And this income is being invested in houses and also in a lot of productive assets and in education for their children and so on. So it's something that substantially can have a very important long-term effect. We estimate in this case here of 2014 to 15, the total value to harvesters in Nepal of $143 million. If we look at the export value, it's in this case here, it's around $200 million. And of course, you might say, is that a lot or not? And around here, it is a lot. Actually, this makes the unrecorded export of medicinal plant products from Nepal the country's most valuable export item. It surpasses all other product groups. So clearly something very, very important. And this is the export of the air-dried raw materials. On top of that, there's the value of domestic processing. Something secondary processing is developing a lot at the moment, has a value of around maybe, let's say, 10, 12 million US dollars per year, but growing. It's mainly for the domestic market. There's not yet any huge producer that has succeeded in exporting very high amounts of products outside the domestic market. But maybe that will come. Besides this, the export of the air-dried unprocessed material and the value of the domestic processing industry, then there's also sale of air-dried products directly in what we call periodic markets. This takes place throughout Nepal. Every single district has periodic market. So these might be in a particular location every Tuesday. And their harvesters, they show up and they sell their medicinal plants directly to consumers. And it's something that we know absolutely nothing about. So we did the first study on that, just came out. And we found that in volume terms, it's not so significant if you compare it to the export. It's around 10% of the export. But in value terms, in this one case district that we did, the value of the small scale retail sales in the periodic markets was the same as the value of everything that went out of the district. And this means that we are talking very significant values. And if we want to understand the value of trade in medicinal plants, then we cannot just look at domestic processing. We cannot just look at the export. We need to consider also these periodic markets. They are important. Okay, so let me talk about how we move towards a forest-based bioeconomy. I think there are 3 key components that we need to pay attention to. First of all, there's what I call data integration and data upscaling. And many of us here today are researchers, and this is our job. We need to develop relevant science inputs. And there's a great scope for integrating different types of data and upscaling this to come out with something which is more policy relevant. There's that paper here, this World Development paper, A Forest Income Sustainable. We did data integration in that paper. We combined the data from growth models in various forests in Nepal, and with information on trade, studies and prices. And actually, what we found here was that there are locations in Nepal where you could increase local incomes from the sale of timber and firewood tenfold compared to now without exceeding sustainable harvest limits. And this was very surprising to us. You could increase incomes tenfold in some of these locations. So you have poverty existing side by side with valuable resources that are not being utilized. And that leads me to the second bullet point here: understand the political ecology. If we want to transit to a bioeconomy, we must understand the reality of the forest and non-timber forest product sector, because there is a reason that we have the institutions that we have and the legislations that we have and so on. They exist for a reason. It's not just bad luck or coincidence. So we need to understand the political ecology, because it allows us to develop feasible interventions. So we need to take this into consideration. So if we have data integration and data upscaling, if we understand the political ecology of the sector, then we can move towards a consolidated theory of change based on realistic interventions. So that's what we're doing at the moment. We're looking at what can be transition pathways to the bioeconomy. And these different transition pathways can then be put together in a theory of change. So just to show you here what we're doing, then of course a lot of studies out there, peer-reviewed science papers, but there's also a lot of gray material, and there's a lot of official documents. The first line here is, the first row is the National Forest Policy. And you can see that that is promoting, say, the cultivation of medicinal plants. And we are going through all these different instruments like the National Forest Policy, the Forest Act, the Investment Program, and so on and so forth. And this is actually, it takes up like 10 pages. And in all of these different interventions, we can characterize them according to the type that they have. Are they oriented towards the supply side? Are they transactional, trying to influence the production network? Or are they demand side, trying to regulate, for instance, consumer behavior? Interestingly, going through all this, we didn't find a single example of demand side intervention. So they're all supply side or transactional. And they can be centralized or decentralized, and they can be pull factors or push factors, where pull factors is something that draws people into the bioeconomy. For instance, if you develop a new technology for cultivation of a particular species and make that available, then you pull in people that want to cultivate. An example of a push is in the fourth row there, the ban on the collection, transport, and trade of all lichens. So that is pushing people out of the bioeconomy. So we are trying to systematically go through all these different proposals, some of which are mutually reinforcing and some that are completely contradictory. So we're trying to get an overview of that, and then we're trying to collect these in transition pathways. And I just want to share with you one example of that, of what we call a transition pathway here, and that is to increase primary sector productivity. And that can be done in various ways. So there are different activities that support this transition pathway. For instance, the example of cultivation, that can be both the development of knowledge on how you cultivate a particular species, but it can also be through the provision of inputs such as seed or seedlings. Another way to increase primary sector productivity is decentralized resource management. That's a big issue in Nepal, and has been very successful in terms of community forestry, and it's possible to roll that out to also include commercial medicinal plant resources in forests, but also in other habitats that are actually part of the Forest Act. There's the opportunity also to increase productivity by reducing formal and informal taxes, simply making it more convenient and more profitable to be part of the trade. And there are other things such as improved infrastructure. So that photo here is the road going up to Mustang, through Mustang district. And when you establish these roads, and they are being established throughout Nepal at the moment, then new populations, they become accessible because transport costs are reduced, and they can then enter the bioeconomy. So getting towards the end here of my half hour, in this thinking about how to approach the forest-based bioeconomy and reviewing all these different proposals, we at the moment, we have identified 5 transition pathways. And we hope that some point in the not too distant future that we can start a sector-wide discussion of these different pathways, bringing actors together from the government side, the various departments, but also from NGOs, also from industry organizations, and also from trade organizations, bring them together, try to discuss constructively and specifically, these are the pathways, which should we focus on. And that could form the foundation for formulating an explicit bioeconomic strategy for non-timber forest products in Nepal. And that would be to the advantage of species, harvesters, traders, processors, and consumers. So that is definitely the goal. Yeah, so this is my last slide. Of course, many thanks to my co-authors and co-thinkers. Some are listed here. Also for financial support, and of course also to the Forest History Society for hosting us and making this possible. So with that, thank you very much, and I will be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thanks. Over to you, Jim.
Thanks, Carsten. That was excellent. Very interesting stuff, you know. I found that we have a few questions, and I've got a bunch of questions to ask too, but we can get to those later. First, Connor Rocket says, thank you for this presentation. And could you discuss what, if any, safeguards or institutional arrangements among harvesters exist to ensure the sustainability of harvesting? So are there any local or harvester, regulations or arrangements for that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And of course, it's a very complex one. So yes, there are both formal and informal mechanisms in place. There are very few examples of actual open access resources here. So many resources, especially in the middle hills and also in the conservation areas in the high mountains, are subject to formal management, right? So in order to utilize them, there must be a management plan with prescribed harvests and so on. How well does that work? That's another thing and another discussion. But even in places where you don't have these formal management plans, in areas that are not handed over to local communities, then there are still regulations in place. So if we take the example of that the Yasagumba fungus that I showed as one of the examples, and if you go to the high altitude areas, then there are many places where there are local rules, for instance, restricting access to the harvesting areas until a certain date. That might be overseen by a local committee that makes sure that no one starts collection before the others. So you can say indirectly that is a way of promoting sustainability. Does it work or not? Well, that's another question. If we take that fungus, then that's a very, very tricky discussion, right? Because the ecology of the product is very complex, right? So you have the ecology, the reproduction cycle of the fungus and of the growth moths. And there are many species of growth moths. So what is actually the limiting factor here? hard to say. No one knows. There's a lot of opinion about this. There's been high-level papers, like in the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, saying that there's over-harvesting. But if you really look at what data they've got to argue that case, it's basically 30 interviews with harvesters who say that they think they're collecting less now than they did in the past. And that's not very convincing. We need better data, and we need better to understand the reproduction cycles of these. Of course, that's a very special product, but it's interesting, and we have to mention it because it's so important. But for many of the others, for the perennials, for the herbs, then there are some studies out there looking at what is the impact on populations, say inside and outside protected areas. And there is some data to show that populations are thriving better in protected areas than outside protected areas. But basically, for many of these products, we need to approach and understand sustainability much better than we do now. And the good news is that there's a lot of studies out there that if we sit down, we synthesize them, then we can start to say something. For many of these species that are being traded, not all, but for many of them, we could start to say something pretty solid about sustainable management guidelines and levels of sustainable harvests.
Thanks very much. That was very good. Very good. I hope that answers your question. I got another question. How does Tibet fit into all of this situation?
Yeah, well, that's super interesting, right, with Tibet. And actually, we're working on a paper on trade to Tibet. Many of these species, like that fungus, the main distribution area of that is actually in Tibet. So that's the core production area. And we have to distinguish between the Tibetan plateau and the Himalayan range. So if we look at, for instance, climate change predictions for that fungus, then the climate modeling for Tibet says that the production area is going to decrease. It's going to move south. For the Himalayas, the same climate modeling says that climate changes are likely to increase the production area of this fungus. So there are different effects, right, in Tibet and in the Himalayas. But in generally, historically, of course, we could talk a lot about the importance of Tibetan trade. I think if we look at it through a current lens, then the big issue is the Belt and Road Initiative that China is rolling out. And if you look in detail into the Belt and Road Initiative, then you will see that rolling out the knowledge of traditional Chinese medicine is part of the strategy, right? So China is actually seeking to export traditional Chinese medicine systems. And if that is a success, no doubt it will lead to increased demand and therefore also increased pressure on many of these plant populations in the Himalayas, right? So I think that's really the current key issue, is the Belt and Road Initiative. What will be the impact on plant populations?
Excellent answer. It's really a complex situation. There are all sorts of facets that you have to consider. It's amazing that we've gotten this far. John Welker asks, is there any work being done by either government or non-governmental organizations toward identifying the medicinal benefits and harms of these different products? So the actual efficacy of the products.
Yeah, there's a lot of work going into this. It's not my field, right? So I'm more into the trade. I'm interested in whether people want to buy it or not. Whether it works is a different issue. But of course, sometimes when we do our searches and we look for trade studies, I mean, there are very few of these compared to studies that are looking at the chemical constituents of these plants. So there's a lot of work going on in that. Also, again, if we go back to that Yasagomba fungus there, then China has been investing for decades in trying to reproduce it in the lab. And they have succeeded in doing that now. Is it commercially viable? Will consumers want it? That's another story. But yeah, so it's outside my field, but there's no doubt that there's a lot of work going on looking at ethnopharmacological issues here and whether these products actually work or not.
I think it's really important to realize that people are out there gathering this material, this plant material, whether it works or not, they believe it. Whether it's truly medicinal, it really,
yeah,
the fact that they're out there gathering it.
I think there's some indication that many of these products, like Ayurvedic medicinal products, are not inferior goods, right? On the contrary, they're superior goods, meaning that the more income people have, the more they buy. So it's not something you opt out. In the background here, you can see fuel wood, right? Everyone opts out of fuel wood. It's an inferior good, right? You don't want to go and cut that and drag it back to your place and then burn it and smoke all over the place. You want electricity, right? Everyone wants out of fuel wood, basically. Of course, nice smell and so on. But if you had no other alternative, no, right? So that's an inferior good. But apparently many of these Ayurvedic, for instance, medicinal plant products are not. And demand is increasing with increasing incomes. And incomes, fortunately, are increasing in these big markets, in China and India. And therefore, it seems reasonable to assume that demand is also going to, or prices are going to increase in the future for many of the products.
You were saying that a harvester can make $12,000 a kilo for the fungus. That's amazing. I wonder how long does it take someone to harvest a kilo, and how many pieces are there in a kilo?
Yeah, so obviously we looked into that, right? And so it depends. I mean, they come in various sizes, and there's also blah blah blah. But around 4,000 pieces per kg. How many pieces can a collector collect in a day? Varies a lot. Different studies. Average is 8.
8 pieces?
8 pieces.
8 pieces in a day.
Yeah. Of course, you collect more at the start of the season, right? And it varies a lot depending on the location and so on. But as one piece is around, let's say 300 rupees here, right? So that's 2,400 rupees in a day. So a government officer salary, it's 30,000, 40,000, 50,000, right? So yeah, it's not, it's a lot of money, right?
It's a huge amount of money. Sandra asks a question. I'm wondering if climate change is being considered in the formulation of sustainability parameters, especially considering the complex ecology of the fungus.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of work going into using occurrence points to do a species distribution modeling for this product, right? So that allows, and then if we combine that with climate change predictions, then that allows a prediction in the change of area. And for in Nepal, the prediction is that the production area will increase, as I mentioned before. But in the core production area of Tibet, it will decrease and it will shift south, and that will have huge socioeconomic consequences, obviously. So yeah, there's a lot of attention on this. In fact, I think there's more attention being paid to these climatic aspects than to issues of establishing sustainable harvest guidelines or understanding production networks.
Charles asked a question. What about cultivation and propagation of the fungus? I think you mentioned that. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that? If people try to do that, is it happening?
Yeah. So especially, the Chinese have been investing in that for decades, actually for more than 5 decades. And now last year they claimed in a paper that they have completed it, and they're able to reproduce the moths, and they're able to reproduce the larva, and they're able to reproduce the entire product. If we are just now trying to publish a consumer survey on this fungus. So we asked 3,000 consumers why they buy this. And apparently there's a lot of association of this product with pristine nature and wildness and stuff, right? So that might indicate that you cannot just substitute a lab product for a wild harvested product, even if you claim that, you know, it is the same product, right? So can you do that? Who knows, right? And anyway, if you did it, if you succeeded in you know, producing 100 tons in the lab, then that would have very, very severe consequences for these rural harvesters, right? So yeah, it's being done. What would be the impacts? Yeah, we will see.
The socioeconomic impacts on the harvesters would be tremendous.
Yeah, be catastrophic.
Yeah. Daniel asked a question. He says, very exciting presentation, and the world population is increasing and demand for NTFPs is huge. Have they tried domesticating certain NTFPs of high priority for local communities?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, right? So what we see basically is that products at low altitude, where there's a lot, that the population density is a lot higher in the foothills than in the high mountains. So a lot of products like soap nut and cinnamon, this cinnamon leaves and cinnamon bark, they have been cultivated. So where there's a lot of forest conversion, very little wild habitats, then we see processes of cultivation. We don't really understand them. We don't know what goes on in the moment of cultivation. What is it that happens? But apparently it is usually farmer driven. So in Nepal, a lot of the cultivation initiatives and government services are focused on exotics, lemongrass or mint, for instance, right? And not so much on the indigenous species. If you go higher up, then there's not a lot of cultivation going on, presumably because it doesn't pay. Why would you invest in cultivating something that you can go and, you know, just drag out of the ground? But we do see for some products also at high altitude that farmers are starting to experiment with them because they are becoming more difficult to find in the wild. So some years ago, we wanted to study the population dynamics of Paris polyphylla, one of the species that is being harvested, the root there. And in order to do these population dynamic studies, you need 400 individuals in a population. And we had our teams of botanists, you know, scouring the mountains, visiting the national parks and so on, and they couldn't find a population with 400 individuals. They found 140. So surely some of these species are under considerable pressure. And for those, we see that farmers, they start to experiment with cultivation, but it's a bottom-up process. It's not subject to explicit analysis and then centrally funded interventions to promote and disseminate technology. It's farmers' bottom-up thing.
I think we find that similar situations almost universally with many of the non-timber products. Why should I cultivate when I can just go out my back door and collect?
Yeah.
You know? Yadev asked a question. He says, how would you link the bioeconomy and ABS? And I'm not sure what ABS stands for. It's under the Nagoya Protocol. Do you know what ABS is? And maybe Yadev, could you pipe in and elaborate on ABS? You know what ABS is under the Nagoya?
Yeah, it rings a bell, but it's far away. I was reading a paper on that, but it's many years ago. So we need to be more specific.
Maybe Yadev can pipe in and elaborate on that, but I'll move. We've got only a few more minutes, so I want to get to some of these more questions. Sajana asked, is there any possibility of exploitation of the cordyceps as the value is so high? sort of what can be done to control exploitation. And I think we've addressed this, but maybe just a little bit more on sort of how do you control exploitation of these products?
Well, I think it's a good question if it's in relation to resource management, right? Because that is probably the key issue today, and it's not really being addressed, right? So this product is so valuable that it draws a lot of harvesters, right? So a lot of outsiders arrive in the harvesting areas, and many of these high altitude communities, they say, well, maybe we do not formally own or have management rights to these resources, to these alpine meadows, but we have been using them and taking care of them for hundreds of years. So this is our resource, and you're not welcome, right? We never saw any of you here, you know, when there was nothing, right? You just ignore us, and now there's some money to be picked, and now you come in and you're not welcome. And then they shut off access, and then you have conflicts, and there are reports of people getting killed. And it is also a kind of, it can escalate. So out in far western Nepal, in Dachula, where we have been working on this species, then the lowlanders are denied access to the high altitude areas, but the high altitude villagers cannot survive. It's a very harsh environment, right? So to survive there, you need agriculture, but you don't have a lot of agricultural land. So you also need to trade, and you need your livestock. So these are the three legs of your livelihood strategies. And the livestock, the limiting factor determining how much livestock you can have in a high altitude village is your access to winter fodder. And so they have big herds, and they cannot survive in the winter. They have to bring them down to graze in the lowlands, in the community forests. But now the lowlanders are saying, well, you are denying us access to the Yazugomba resources, so you cannot bring your livestock here. Sorry, no can do. You're not welcome. So that's a way of conflicts are escalating, and that I think is really a key issue. How do you regulate access in a way that is fair and equitable?
Interesting. Yeah. Good response. We got a couple more questions, and we're going to run out of time here. But let's see if I can get to the. Kishore asked, "Did you observe elite capture in the fungus trade?" And I'm not sure what elite capture means, but if yes, does it really enhance livelihoods of the poor? And how does the bioeconomy?
That's the beauty of it, man. That's the beauty of it, right? We have not been able to document elite capture for this. That's what makes it so interesting, right? If you go and talk to these harvesters, they unanimously say everyone is harvesting, right? Of course, we have been critical about this. Is that really true, right? And then we have actually been trying to map, and we're working on a study of that now, who's going and who's not going. But it does appear that actually not everyone, but almost everyone has access. There are certain requirements that need to be fulfilled. Maybe in a particular village, if you're a newcomer, then maybe you don't have access, right? So you need some years of presence before you're given access. Households that have too little labor, too few family members, maybe cannot spare people to go harvesting. So there are some that do not harvest, but definitely this is not an issue of, like we've seen elite capture with timber resources in so many places and so on. It's not a replication of that, not at all, right? And that's why you see these community-wide economic benefits from this. That is just quite exceptional. Yeah.
Interesting, very interesting. Well, look, we're gonna run out of time here. Carsten, I want to say thanks very much for the presentation. I found it very interesting and useful in my perspective, because it really it's starting to operationalize what we're talking about, this concept of bioeconomy and TFPs. And it seems like much of the scholarship on bioeconomy is really focused in biotechnology. And we're trying to figure out, okay, how do you take food and medicine and integrate it into a bioeconomy? And I think you've really started bringing together a framework for people to do that. And I really appreciate that. It was an excellent conversation, excellent discussion.